Happy New Year, Postscript listeners! Christina and I are gearing up to watch Season 3 of All Creatures Great and Small. But before we do that, listen to this extended conversation between Vern Gauthier, Christina, and I when we sat down a few weeks ago to talk about the Season 2 finale of All Creatures Great and Small. Check out our extended bonus conversation. So Vern, thank you for coming today. We really appreciate it. You're a fan of the books, a fan of the shows, and a moderator of a Facebook group. So can you tell us more about your love for All Creatures Great and Small, how you became a fan, how the group started?
Sure, I'd be happy to do that. I first was exposed to the show, TV show, I guess late 70s, early 80s. I'm not exactly sure when it was, but I did watch the episodes and immediately fell in love with that. It wasn't until later that I went back and read the books. And then when this new series started, I just really fell in love with it again and started to watch the new series and became a really big fan of the new series, and then went back and started to reread the books again. So, I mean, that's been my...
It's a cycle.
Yeah. It's sort of something I have forgotten about for a few years and then came back and was like rediscovering something that you loved once and you come back to it and it's like, oh yeah, this is great. I forgot how good this was.
Yeah.
The current series I really enjoy. What I really like about it is that they have, while they use the books as a reference, they will take some things directly from the books. They'll have other scenes where they take part of it or they combine 2 or 3 scenes from different parts in the books, and then they'll just do something where they'll take one line from the book and create something totally new from it. So even though I have seen the series before and have read the books, it keeps it interesting because you're not quite sure where they're going to go, at any one time. So I really like that. Another thing I really appreciate about this series is built around the women characters, especially Helen and Mrs. Hall. Mrs. Hall in the books really doesn't have much of anything. And even Helen is somewhat limited. But in this current series, they really give them their own backstory, their own story. And it's just not dependent on the men in the series. They have their own part to play in this as well. So, and how they develop all the characters and give them their own backstory. So I think that's really good. So
Yeah, I honestly can't imagine this story without Mrs. Hall.
Yeah, I can't either.
It just doesn't feel, it would feel incomplete to me.
She's so central to the story now.
Yeah.
Yes.
I mean, she is Skeldale House, right?
She is Skeldale House. It's
She
very
is the
true.
house, yes.
Yeah.
So you have a Facebook group. Can you share that with our listeners?
I do not have a Facebook group.
Oh, okay. I'm sorry.
I am a member of the All Creatures Great and Small Fans Worldwide Facebook group. I've only been a member there 6, 7, 8 months. I've been a moderator of that group for about the last 4 months, I believe.
Okay.
And we have fans from all over the world. We just passed 7,000 members.
Woohoo! That's a big number.
Yes,
That's
it
a lot
is.
of people.
Big group.
Though there are other Facebook groups out there for All Creatures Great and Small that are maybe 3 times bigger than us. But we like to think we are smaller, but we have more discerning.
Yeah.
And
Well, you've built a community.
we
You've
do.
built a real community.
We do. So, and it's if anyone is out there who's really into All Creatures Great and Small and you can't get enough of talking about it and dissecting it and wondering about what's going to happen to this character and that character and talking about how the relationships are building, you should really come to All Creatures Great and Small Fans Worldwide and join us because we do all that kind of stuff all the time.
It sounds
Yeah.
like there's even some sneak peeks for the American viewers
There
from
are
time to time.
sneak peek spoilers.
Yeah,
Yes.
yeah. So
be
warning,
careful, but-
anything that says spoiler, and you
Right.
don't want to be spoiled. But yeah, it sounds like a great group.
Yeah. So it's really for people who are really into it. Yeah.
Yeah.
We watched this episode together before we recorded. Was there anything that you noticed? I mean, you noticed a lot, but is there anything that really stood out to you?
Well, I just really enjoy the scene that James finally proposes very awkwardly to Helen.
Very awkwardly.
The scene in the car.
The scene in the car.
I was like, which one? There's
Right,
two.
because there's technically two proposals here.
well,
The awkward one, the romantic one.
it's one of my favorite scenes is the whole car scene, then going up onto the hill, because that scene is just so creative. It's basically taken from one line in the book, and they create this whole scene around it. I can read that for you if you would like me to.
sure.
Oh, yes,
Yes,
please
go for it.
do.
So in the book, this is just after Siegfried has spoken to James about it's time for him to get married. And so then James says this, I don't suppose I am the first person to have had his life fundamentally influenced by one of Siegfried's chance outbursts. I thought his opinions ridiculous at the time, but he planted a seed which germinated and flowered almost overnight. There is no doubt he is responsible for the fact that I was the father of a grown-up family while I was still a young man, because when I brought the subject up with Helen, she said yes, she'd like to marry me, and we set our eyes on an early date. She seemed surprised at first. Maybe she had the same opinion of me as Siegfried and expected it would take me a few years to get off the ground. So,
Which we all thought.
yes.
Right.
And so from that simple line of she was surprised at 1st, they build this whole scene of her in the car,
Right.
and when it twigs on her that James is actually does
Like-
want to marry her, and she gives that look of just staring at him. And so this whole scene is built around that.
Yeah.
You know?
I like just she's surprised and then wow.
There's a moment of panic, it almost feels like, but she
Yeah.
knows like it's what she wants. I think maybe that realization is like, oh, she wants it too.
Well, I
He
mean,
wants
earlier
it
in the
and she
episode, James
wants
can't
it.
even say, you're my girlfriend, we're
Right.
dating. And then all of a sudden, he wants to marry her.
Right, when,
Yeah.
when he's asking if she wants to have dinner with his
Yeah.
parents, he's fumbling, isn't he, to
Yeah,
try to even
because,
describe what the
you know.
conversation is. And then a half an hour later, he's basically saying,
Marry
Will
me.
you marry me?
I want to marry you. Because Helen says, well, why don't you just say things? He says, it's because you might say no.
Yeah.
And that's when she understands he really does want to marry me.
And so she's like, oh my gosh.
But he's just afraid.
And
He's
then-
afraid to
and
ask
Stop the
her.
car. I need
Right.
to get out.
Stop the
I need some
car.
air.
And so that gets us back to the line that she seemed surprised at first. Yeah, she was
Yeah.
surprised. 20 minutes earlier, he couldn't even say what their relationship was. And now she realizes he wants to marry her. So then they walk up to the field,
Yeah, exactly.
And then for me, what is some of the best writing in the series is when they have the conversation in the field. And James is afraid of Helen saying no. And what does she say? She
No.
says
She says
no.
no.
She never says yes there. Jane,
She says, you didn't talk to my father, did you?
Yeah.
But
Yeah.
James says, I want to marry you. And she says, I'm not afraid either. And he says, you're not? And she says,
Yeah.
no. So she never says yes. She says
She
no.
says no.
But her no is a yes.
Yes.
So what he thought he would hate to hear actually becomes something
The best thing to hear.
Best thing to hear.
Yeah,
So
exactly.
that is just such good writing, I think.
It is
It
great
really
writing.
is. So, can you tell us something that you know or like about All Creatures Great and Small that you'd like our listeners to know?
Well, I really enjoy the character of Helen. And Helen ends up being James's wife. Now, in real life, Alf White, who is James Herriot, who wrote the books, his wife's name is Joan. And so in the book,
Okay.
it's Helen. But so a nod is given to Joan. Joan is the name of Mr. Alderson's wife who dies. And then Joan becomes the name of the
foal.
foal
yeah.
that's born. So
Yes.
there's something there.
That's really nice. And Mr. Alderson refers to his wife Joan as 1 in 1,000. Like
Right.
my wife is 1 in 1,000. She's
Right.
amazing.
So Mr. Alderson is speaking for Alf White as he
Yeah.
writes that character to say something about his real life wife Joan, I think.
I think
Oh,
so
that's
too.
sweet.
It was
Yeah,
really
I didn't
sweet.
think about that
that's
connection.
really nice. And Joan also was one of the first women in her area to wear trousers, to wear pants, slacks, however you want to say it. And Helen, in this story,
She wears a
She
lot.
always
of
wears
pants.
pants,
She wears the pants.
She wears the
she
pants
wears
in the family. And maybe not just literally she wears the pants in the family, but figuratively
Yes.
too. But yeah, so there's that. And then if you look at Mrs. Hall, her first name is Audrey.
Yes.
Right. In the book, Siegfried's wife name is Audrey. So,
Oh my gosh.
so it's
I'm so hopeful.
I think Christina's freaking out over there.
I'm so hopeful.
well, I know Christina was saying that
Everybody
she is a
knows.
fan of the idea of possibly eventually
Yes.
marrying the
I've
two
talked
off.
about it. I want them to be together.
You do.
I'm conflicted now because I love Diana and I love Dorothy and Mr.
I love
Hammond's
Dorothy.
in here too. And like, they're,
I'm game for Dorothy.
but I love a love triangle.
You know, and
or
the-
like a square pentagon. What are we
Right,
at now?
whatever it is.
I mean, in the Facebook group, this plays itself out. There are people who want Dorothy. There are people who want Audrey. There's
Diana.
people who want Diana.
Yeah.
You
Oh
know,
my
so,
gosh,
So everybody
that's
has
awesome.
their Siegfried love interest that they're rooting for to turn out, and we'll just have to wait and see. But
That's so cool.
Yeah.
Well, we really appreciate it. Thank you for joining us today, Vern. We love talking to you about this episode and learning more about your love of the series and your Facebook group. So if anybody's interested, any of our listeners, remember the Facebook group is called All Creatures, Great and Small, Fans Worldwide.
Yep.
And so we're going to take a quick break. And when we come back, we'll have more from Vern.
Support for All Creatures, Great and Small on Masterpiece is made possible locally by WITF members and by Pleasant View Communities, UPMC, Murray, and Argiers Murati Neurosurgical Associates of Lancaster.
Welcome back. We're here with Vern for more discussion about All Creatures, Great and Small. What's your favorite relationship in the series?
well, my favorite relationship, probably because I'm a hopeless romantic, is James and Helen. I just love their relationship. It's so honest.
It is.
They are good for each other. They kind of fill each other's holes, kind of type thing.
Yeah, they complement each
They
other
do
really well.
They do complement each other really well.
They do.
And I got to admit, season 1 was a bit of trying for me because I was like, okay, producers, writers, and directors, when is you going to be cut out of the picture?
Aw, man.
See, I was ready for Hugh to go, but because Hugh is also Neville Longbottom, right?
Yes,
his last
yes,
name
that's
in
why
Harry
I
Potter.
love. That's why I love him because of Harry Potter.
Yeah,
but
yeah.
I knew he had to go. I knew the relationship had to end.
Right.
But I just want him. I
And,
like him.
and I knew they were going to eventually separate Helen from him, but as each episode
Yeah.
went on, it was like, well.
When?
Enough already.
And then we ended up in the Christmas special, and
Uh-huh.
it wasn't until the up at the Chapman's on Christmas Eve where all that started to play out, and you could see that Helen was really starting to have doubts about her
Yeah.
marriage to you, and
And she really wanted James to stop her.
She really did. She asked him 3 times.
That's right.
Can you
Point
just,
blank.
what did you want to say?
Basically.
what did you want to tell me? Yeah,
Yes.
and she already knew. You could tell just by looking at
Oh,
her face.
yeah.
Oh,
So-
yeah.
And then, it's not till they're in the church and you have that scene playing out. It's like, finally, So that scene just redeemed the whole of season 1 for me.
Finally, he's out of the picture.
Yeah.
We can move on.
And then all
And
of
then he
se-
comes back for cricket.
right. Yeah. And then all of season 2, really, until episode 6, is about James and Helen and their relationship
Yeah.
developing. At the start of season 2, when Helen is feeling guilty and she's in that dark place, it's James that, speaks, I would say, a word of grace into her life, that everybody deserves a second chance, that, I've missed you. So he just speaks truthfully to her and is a main reason that she's able to reemerge back into regular life. But then Helen helps James as well because, as we know, James likes to avoid conflict. He kind of puts
he
things
would prefer not to deal with
right.
it. Yes.
You know, and then like in this episode, when James runs out of words to say to his parents, Helen jumps in and says, you know, so they
How
do,
much of a difference he's made. Yeah.
yeah. So they do complement one another, and just to see the relationship grow and deepen is something that I just find really appealing.
Yeah.
You know, and the other one I would think is the relationship between Jenny and Helen. You know, where Helen goes from being Jenny's mother, even though they're sisters, and as season 2 goes on, Jenny becomes more and more sisters with Helen again.
Yeah.
And even in this episode that we saw where James comes to pick Helen up, and Helen's carrying the chickens, and she's flustered a little bit. Even Helen gets flustered because she's going to go meet James's parents.
Yeah.
And Jenny starts telling Helen, you got to put the chickens down or people are going to think we're a right bunch of scruff bags. So in that sense, Jenny is now kind of taking the motherly role for Helen. So it's good to see that relationship grow and become more on even ground as the series continues.
Yeah. I always I think in my brain, like as Jenny gets taller, she becomes more of a sister to Helen.
Yes.
Because she's so tall. I think she's like as tall as Helen.
I think she's taller.
Yeah, I think she's taller, right?
Well, yeah, like this whole story works because of the relationships. Like the reason that they're becoming sisters is Mrs. Hall kind of interjected in season 1 and said, I think it's time for you to, you know, Jenny's getting older, and I think it's time for you to be her sister instead. So.
Yeah.
Right. And,
it's
and so
really nice.
Mrs. Hall is sort of a mother figure for Helen in some ways as well.
She is. And for Tristan.
Yes. And for
She's
Tristan.
she mothers everybody.
Yes.
So, Vern, earlier when we were watching the scene between Siegfried and James, when Siegfried tells James, like, why don't you just marry Helen? You mentioned something about the books.
Well, in the book, Siegfried actually has a lot more to say.
Yeah.
And Tristan and Mrs. Hall aren't part of that scene. Now, what Siegfried says in the current production is true to what Siegfried says in the books, but Siegfried says a whole lot more in the books.
Okay.
In fact, when James is telling Helen about what Siegfried said, if you'll notice, he says something there that Siegfried doesn't say in the TV production, but if you go look in the book, he's quoting what Siegfried says in the book.
Oh my gosh, I didn't even know that. So they probably did say it
right
in some line or in some version.
Well, they knew
and they didn't
that
use
it was there, but I find it interesting. When you go back and look at that scene, when James is quoting Siegfried, he's using different words to describe what Siegfried said than what Siegfried actually said. And if you go look at what James said and go look at the book, it's what's in the book.
I like how they're giving like very subtle nods to the original, like the source material. Like that's really lovely because I have not read or listened to the books yet. So
neither have I.
That's been a really fun insight to learn with you.
Yeah, thank you.
Oh, you're welcome.
While we were talking before we started recording, you mentioned that your wife is from England.
She is.
And you are planning a visit.
We are.
So do you want to tell us about your exciting trip?
Yeah, I think this is one of my connections to the show as well because I lived in England for a few years, way back in the 1980s. Met my wife Elizabeth there, who's English. So maybe that's one of the reasons I like the relationship between James and Helen so much. But
you feel like it mirrors your own.
To some degree. To some degree.
Did you meet her while you were living there? Is that how that?
Yes, we met there and were married there before coming back to the States. So we're going back in the springtime after Easter for a couple of weeks to visit family. Also, we're going to go stay up in Harrogate, up in Yorkshire.
That's so exciting.
For 3 days. So who knows? We might get fortunate and stumble across some filming of an episode of All Creatures Great and Small. We are going to go visit Grassington, which is the Derby of All Creatures Great and Small. It's the real.
It's the real town of
Derby. It's the real town.
Yes.
And we're going to go visit the Alderson farm, or at least go by it. I don't think you can drive onto it.
Oh,
But, so we're going to go
property.
check out some of the locations while we're there as well.
Well, that's really fun.
That is. Are you going to go to Brighton Hall too and see where Tricky Woo lives?
I hadn't thought about that one.
Oh my gosh! If you do, you have to share
Should
all
try
the
it.
pictures with us. And, come back and tell us all about it.
If you happen to meet Tricky Woo, shake his paw for me.
Okay.
Yeah.
Because I'm
Give me a
probably
high
his
five.
biggest fan.
Derek, right?
Derek, yeah.
yes,
If you
Derek.
meet Derek.
Yes,
Yeah.
exactly.
So, Vern, is there something you're really looking forward to doing while you're visiting England?
Well, I must say that we're looking forward to visiting family, right? I have to say
Okay, well,
that
that's
first.
a good thing to lead with, yes.
Right. But besides that, we're going to stay in Harrogate, and I think that is where the actress that plays Jenny, Imogen Clausen, is that how you say her name?
I'm the worst person to ask.
Okay.
I'm bad with names.
But
Sounds right.
It's probably right.
she's from there, so it's just cool being
That's awesome.
in that vicinity. And we are going to go visit some of the sites. My fantasy is that we stumble across filming of a scene, because sometimes that happens when they're having in Grassington, when they're filming a Derby scene. You'll see people who are watching it and
okay.
things
They
like that.
gather around.
Yeah, and then the other fantasy would be I'm an avid birder, a bird watcher,
Yeah.
and Samuel West, who plays Siegfried in the series, is an avid bird watcher. So,
Right.
The fantasy would be being able to go birding with him while we're
Oh my gosh,
That would be so fun.
that would be awesome.
I bet you he's nothing like actual Siegfried, too. So that's probably a good thing.
It would
Yeah.
probably
To go
be,
birding.
really.
exactly.
Is there anything else you want to share, or like something that you really like about this production that you want to tell us about?
One thing I didn't share about is they don't overspeak the parts. The writing is so rich in that less is more.
Right.
I remember an interview with Nicholas Ralph. He said we were struggling with finding words for the scene, and the director just said, "Then don't speak it. Just act
Just
it.
live it."
Just live it."
Yeah.
And I think the whole series is like that. Is that they don't have the actors overspeak. They leave room for just facial expressions and body language. And I think they leave room for the imagination of the viewer to work
Insert
it out
some
in
of
their
that.
own mind what's going on there.
Yeah.
And so I think it makes for a much richer scene and much richer series to do it that way, because it leaves room for us to interject our own thoughts as to what's exactly going on at that point. So I really like that about this production as well.
Yeah, there were a lot of scenes where you were pointing out exactly how Helen is reacting without saying a single word. I thought about Tristan when he's at the table crying, how powerful that was, because we
Right.
think Tristan's a goofball, but we get
Right.
to see him. So yeah, I agree. It's really fantastic.
And just one little example of that is, after the big romantic proposal up on the hill with the sheep and the view of the lake, they go back to Helen's farm, and he's going to ask Mr. Alderson, and
Right.
she tells James not to gabble.
You tend to gabble on.
And then he gabbles.
He gabbles on, and she doesn't say another word after that. She just gives like 3 or 4 different looks, like,
Right, well, you're doing it right now.
You're doing it right now. And then he stops and says, "Oh."
Yeah.
Okay, so she communicates so much with him just not
by looking.
not saying
Yeah.
anything. So, that's a really fun example there.
Yeah, that's a fun scene.
It is. All right, Vern, well, thank you so much for joining us today. We love talking to you about this episode, learning more about, your visit to England coming up. Please let us know how that goes, and if you meet Sam West, and take
or
tons of
Derek.
pictures, or Derek. We do need to hear about Derek. And then if any of our listeners are interested in joining your Facebook group, they can go to All Creatures Great and Small Fans Worldwide.
I enjoyed it. Thank you.
We'd like to thank Pleasant View Communities, UPMC, Murray, Argiers Marathi Neurosurgical Associates of Lancaster, and WITF members for supporting All Creatures Great and Small on WITF. Thank you.